Chapter 8. Yelena's Song. As we walked, we talked about the great food we'd eaten at the banquet and the dances and songs that were performed. I was so caught up in our conversation that I didn't take note of the truck idling in the village square. We kept on walking, and there were voices in the air. Slavko stopped talking mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I stood still and listened hard. The usual chirrup of cicadas, and fragments of urgent whispers in the breeze. We kept our silence and walked with soft steps so we could listen for sounds. A truck passed. "That's the second truck we've seen tonight," said Slavko. "Why are they here?" "I was wondering the same thing," I said. No one in Filivka owned a truck, not even Chort or Tupolev. Everyone used horse-drawn wagons. As we got closer to our end of the village, we were about to pass the Holotos's house when a third truck pulled away from their barn. Why would the truck be at their barn? The truck drove past us, and even though I kept my head down and pretended not to look at it, I glanced at the driver out of the corner of my eye. A military cap and collar. The military? That would explain the trucks, but why would the army be visiting the Holotos? When we finally got inside our own house, I could hear the hum of a motor idling out back. Slavko noticed it too, and he opened his mouth to say something, but stopped when I put my finger on his lips. I crept out quietly, hiding in the shadows and behind trees so that no one would see us. Slavko did the same, but a meter or so behind me. The side of our barn, where our wheat was stored, had been tethered open with a rope, and a military truck was backed up into it. 2 soldiers were lifting our sacks of grain and throwing them into the back of the truck. All our hard work, our exceptional crop, we weren't being paid for it. They were stealing it. I stepped forward and said, "Excuse me, comrades. Can I help you?" One of the soldiers ignored me, but the other stopped and looked me up and down. "Go back to bed, kid," he said. "That's my family's grain," I said. "Why are you taking it? And in the middle of the night, no less." The soldier pulled out his pistol and pointed it at my head. "Just leave," he said. "We have work to do." I put my hands up and stumbled back a few steps. "Comrades, I'm asking a question, that's all. We pay our taxes, but you're taking everything, and in the middle of the night." "I'm counting to 3. If you don't get out of here, you're dead. 1, 2. Slavko grabbed my belt and pulled me hard from behind. I nearly fell, but regained my balance. We ran from the barn, but hid behind a tree so we could continue to watch them. When they finished loading our grain, one of them got a burlap bag from the truck and went to our garden. Slavko ran after the soldier. "Leave our garden alone," he said. The soldier ignored him. I watched helplessly as he filled up the bag with what vegetables were still left there. I wished Mama and Tato were home. Tato wouldn't stand for this. If an adult ordered them away, would they have listened? I ran and stood beside Slavko in front of our small garden. The soldier with the burlap bag was kneeling in front of Mama's potatoes. I put my hands on my hips and tried to look like an adult. "You realize that this garden means the difference between my family living and dying over the next winter, don't you?" The soldier looked up. "This doesn't belong to you," he said. "It's being shipped to the cities. If you want to eat, join the kolkhots." His words sent a chill through me. Ruslana said the kolkhots harvest had also been taken. And then it sunk in on me just how big Stalin's lie had been. While we were all dancing and eating in the kolkhots, he had sent in the army to steal our food and grain. He had tricked us this entire growing season, lulling us into thinking they had softened their methods. We provided them with a bountiful harvest, and now they would leave us with nothing. And what of Mama and Tato at this meeting? They had gathered all the landowners, and there was that idling truck. What was happening to them now? I grabbed Slavko's hand and ran from the soldier. We flew onto the street. Right at that minute, Comrade Chort opened his door and stepped out. He grinned. Pretty good plan, wouldn't you say? I might even get another promotion. I ignored him. Slavko and I kept running down the street. We got to the village square. The truck was still parked in front of the village council building, but there was no driver, and the motor had been turned off. The door of the council building was closed. I ran up to it and pulled on the handle, but it was locked. I pounded on the door, shouting, "Mama, Tato, they're stealing our grain!" No one opened it. I ran around to the side of the building, my brother at my heels. There was a side window, but I was too short to look inside. "Boost me up," said Slavko. "What do you see?" I asked him as he gripped onto the wooden window frame and peered inside. "Soldiers," he said. "And a bunch of our farmers are tied together with rope." "What about Mama and Tato?" I asked. "I can't tell. Stop jiggling," he said, brushing dust off the window. "Okay, I see them. They're tied up. Auntie is not tied up. She's sitting off in the corner holding Tanya." He jumped down from my shoulders, then wrapped his arms around me and wept. Sometimes I forgot that he was just a kid. "Was Tupolev there?" I asked. Slavko stopped crying and looked up at me. "Yes," he said. "But he was sitting in a corner. He didn't look in charge." "Any other shock worker?" I asked. "Not Berkovich or Holodnaya that I could see." Just then, Fedir emerged from the shadows and trotted over to us. "Are you crazy?" he whispered. "If they see you standing here, they'll arrest you. Go home." "Where's your father?" I asked him. "Still at the kolkhots," he said. "Was he a part of this?" I asked, my hands clenched, ready to fight. "No," he said. I turned to Slavko. "I'm going to the kolkhots to find out what's going on. You stay here so we know what's happening to our parents, but don't let the soldiers see you." "I'll stay here too," said Fedir. I ran to the kolkhots. The doors to the outer courtyard were still wide open, and many of the kolkhotsniks stood chatting in clusters. A bandurist played a soft melody from one of the corners. This quiet and contented scene was such a contrast with what was happening in the rest of the village that, for a moment, I had to stop and organize my thoughts. I took a deep breath to calm myself, then looked around. Berkovich and Holodnaya were standing in the far shadows in an animated conversation. I strode up to them. "Comrades," I said, trying to be as polite and calm as I could under the circumstances. "Our farmers are locked up in the village council hall." "They're not locked up," said Berkovich. "It's just a meeting." "No," I said. "We tried to open the door and couldn't. Slavko looked through the window, and he could see soldiers in there and people tied up. There are trucks all over the village, loading up on farmers' grain while they can't be there to defend it." A wave of anger passed over Berkovich's face. "Someone's double-crossed us." Holodnaya said nothing, and she didn't look surprised. Had she known about this beforehand? Berkovich flew out of the courtyard and around the corner to the village square. I was right behind him. I had expected Berkovich to go to the village council building, but he walked right past it. He stormed down our entire main road until he got to Chort's house. I stood in the shadows and watched as he pounded on the door. Chort opened the door and stepped out. "What do you want, Semon? Was it you who called in the soldiers?" "Of course it was," said Chort. "Tupolev's getting too soft." "We were just regaining everyone's trust," said Berkovich. "And you've ruined it." "Look," said Chort. "I'm not going to argue with you. There's a quota, and if we don't fill it, we're the ones in trouble. Now go to bed." "What about the people at the hall?" asked Berkovich. "What about them?" asked Chort. "They can stay there for the night. That gives the soldiers time to clear everything out. Berkovich muttered something that I couldn't hear, then walked away from Chort's house. He noticed me in the shadows and paused to say, "There's nothing you can do. Go home." "I'm not going home. My parents are still arrested," I said. We walked together in silence through the village. And as we did, another couple of trucks drove past. It was quite the operation Chort had organized right under our noses. When we got to the village council building, Slavko was sitting in front of the door, his arms wrapped around his knees. Fedir was pacing. "What did you find out?" asked Slavko. "Chort betrayed us," I said. "No wonder his wife selected that song to dance to," said Slavko. I had forgotten about her odd performance after the dinner. Had she been trying to warn us? Too bad she hadn't warned us sooner, or more clearly. I slumped down beside my brother. Berkovich said, "Are you planning on staying there all night?" "We'll stay as long as we have to," I said. "Our family's in there." "Yulia is still at the Kolkhots," said Fedir. I had a momentary twinge of guilt. All these momentous things were happening to our family, and my sister hadn't even crossed my mind. She had been spending more time with her friends, and in many ways seemed separate from the family. "I'll get her for you," said Fedir. After he walked off, Berkovich said, "Do you want me to wait here with you?" "Thanks, but no," I said. "You and Fedir should get some sleep." Fedir came back a half hour later with a heavy-lidded Yulia in tow. "What's going on?" she asked. We told her. She sat between the two of us and looped her hands through each of our arms. "No matter what, we're family, and we're in this together." Somehow, I fell asleep. So did Slavko and Yulia. I woke up with a jolt in bright sunlight when the door we were leaning on suddenly gave way. A soldier stood there, looking down at us. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Waiting for our parents," I said, scrambling to my feet. Yulia and Slavko got up too, brushing their wrinkles from their clothing. The soldier walked to the truck. I held my breath. Was he going to open the back of it and load in the prisoners? He walked past the back of the truck. He opened the door to the driver's seat and got in. A second soldier walked out of the building. He also walked past the back of the truck without slowing down. He got into the passenger side. The driver turned the key and the engine roared. The truck drove away. I exhaled. Tupolev walked out next. He practically ran down the street toward Chort's house. Neighbors streamed out, then Auntie holding her sleeping daughter, then Tato, and finally, Mama. When they saw us, we had a big family hug. "What happened in there?" I asked. "It seems they were detaining us," said Tato. "Let's go home." It wasn't just our grain and garden vegetables that had been taken. Silny was also gone. Tupolev called a meeting for all the non-Kolkhots farmers to gather at noon in the village square. He stood on the top of a chair and looked out at us. "First," he said, "I owe you an apology. I said you'd be paid for your grain, yet it was taken from you." "What are you going to do about it?" shouted one of the farmers. "We need to be paid." "Please, have patience," said Tupolev. "I'll give you each a promissory note. I'll be following up with the authorities to get you paid." "I can't eat a promissory note," said Auntie Paulina. "I'm sorry," said Tupolev. "I'm trying to fix this." "What about our horses?" asked Tato. "Those have been requisitioned by the government," said Tupolev. "Harvest is over, so you don't need them. You'll be getting tractors for next year. There's a whole lot of building going on. The Dnipro Dam, railroads, factories. Construction requires horses." "We need to plant the winter wheat in late fall," said Mama. "Will we have tractors by then?" "You will," said Tupolev. "You've taken our grain, our food, our horses. How are we supposed to live? How are we supposed to eat?" asked Comrade Petrovna. Tupolev didn't answer. He seemed distracted by someone in the back of the crowd. We all turned to see who it was. Comrade Chort had just stepped onto a chair of his own. "If you want to eat," he said, "I suggest you join the cohorts." A couple of days after the mass theft, we all realized another way that Chort had rubbed salt into our wounds. Our horses had been stolen, but one beautiful, sleek stallion arrived. He was named Polit because he flew like the wind, and he was for Chort's private use, a reward for his thorough collection of our harvest, produce, and horses. When Chort wasn't sitting in front of his house, drinking vodka and watching us, or inside the house yelling at the women, he'd often be seen trotting along on Polit, startling children and chickens, or out in the countryside, inspecting fields.